Tim and Emmie themselves don't need any introduction to this group, as this is their third talk, and they've told us about their adventures from Norway to the Canaries so far. They're joined tonight by David and Judith Eastman, who used to run a sailing school out of Falmouth and have spent 60 years amongst many ocean miles cruising the Cornwall and Devon area. And David and Judith, I listen to it, that's not David. David and Judith are panelists tonight, and they are authors of the cruising guide or pilot guide to the Scilly Islands. And they've kindly agreed to help Tim out tonight, or Tim and Emmie out tonight, correcting the facts amongst the fiction that we're about to hear. So over to you, Tim and Emmie. Thanks. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Just sound test. You've got me on sound as well.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So, right. Let's have a look. Okay. So we left off. We sailed up Norway. So we did that webinar. We then sailed down through Galicia and Portugal, and then went to the Canaries, and we did that seminar. We then got locked down, as everybody else did, and Emmie and I were thinking, oh gosh, what should we do? So the boat was in Las Palmas at that point. What should we do? Shall we go to the boat, or should we go to France? And we thought, oh well, maybe we'll nip across to France and get a little skiing in before going back to the boat. And then the week after we arrived, we got locked down and spent 4 months in the south of France, which was actually pretty amazing, to be fair, and quite blessed really that actually happened. Anyhow, 4 months or 4.5 months later comes July, and we make the decision for a number of reasons, because the plan was to go south at that point, head to Senegal, then to Patagonia and or Caribbean, and carry on. But we took the decision for a number of reasons, because of COVID, because of us trying to start a family, and because of Brexit, to head to the Azores and then back to the UK. So just as a quick catch up to how we got to the Scillies, I went out to the boat in the Canaries as soon as lockdown ended, rushed out there, got the boat ready in a few days, and single-handed it to the Azores, whilst Emmie went back to the UK because she had plenty of her artwork to catch up on, needed to get some stuff out to gallery. So for anybody that isn't watching, Emmie's an artist, and you will see some of that in the presentation. So here's a kind of a 1 minute whistle stop video of my single-handed trip to the Azores, which was quite eventful. So that was, quite an eventful crossing, which should have taken around 6 or 7 days and ended up taking 11 due to getting into some pretty nasty conditions out off Madeira unexpectedly. Chucked the series drogue out after ripping my main. The engine stopped working, and then eventually the wind picked up and had a fantastic crossing to the Azores. That's a completely different story, which I'm not going to allude to now, but perhaps another webinar at some point. We then spent a few weeks in the Azores waiting for a weather window, and it's getting a little bit late now for that crossing back to the UK, and system after system were coming in, some fairly big ones. And And eventually, after 3 very good weeks in the Azores, we crossed back to the UK, and that slide summarizes our crossing back. That was a good forecast for us because there were just loads of gales and storms coming through. So that was on the back of Storm Ellen, and we actually kind of we took the decision to go skirt Galicia and then cross Biscay rather than head north and then east, which is and catch the currents, which is the general way of doing it. But because we went that way, we actually ended up dropping into the Scillies back end of last year on the way back through, which gave us, only for a few days, but gave us a flavour for the Scillies, which is our first ever time there. I'll just say another little thing. So we had some pretty heavy weather going to the Azores, some pretty heavy weather coming back. Oh, so the second, sorry, I must mention that Emmie flew out and met me at the Azores, and we sailed, the passage from the Azores back to the UK was together. And when we pulled in to Plymouth, literally all the way back, sailed to the Scillies, all the way back to Plymouth where we were stopping for winter, I heard a big bang and the aft lower shrouds popped. And I thought I'd just throw it in here because I've heard of these U-bolt arrangements on deck suffering from crevice corrosion and heard quite a lot of stories about this happening and how the aft lowers are so important for offshore boats. And I just thought maybe I'll just mention it. So we had these aft lowers then replaced for proper chain plates and uprated the bolts and whatnot. I then heard from somebody with a very similar boat that this happened to, but instead of just one end of it popping, both of theirs popped. And this is the aft lowers, not the actual outer shrouds, and they lost their mast. So I just thought I'd throw that one in there. If anyone hasn't checked their chain plates or have a U-bolt arrangement and haven't checked it for a while, lifted it or replaced it, that might be a good idea to do so. So we are now in winter last year, and we have the idea of make a baby or go to Svalbard. And we I don't know, I'm not entirely sure whether or not you can even see us or whether you're just seeing the slides, but we do have the former now. So Celestine is 12 weeks old, 12, 13 weeks?
Yep.
13 weeks old.
Gurgling in the background.
Gurgling in the background. So please forgive us if you hear a bit of gurgling and squeaking.
Or something else.
Or something else. So we sacked off the idea of Svalbard and got back on the boat in March, and we decided, right, what are we going to do whilst Emmie is pregnant? Where can we get a decent midwife, and where would be quite nice to spend time on the boat, given that Cornwall was going to be particularly busy this year, and we thought the Scillies would be the best place. And we did source a really good midwife. There's a full-time midwife in the Scillies, and that's what we plan to do.
So we also ended up leaving at the end of March because our winter mooring was up, and actually everywhere was full, so we had trouble. We couldn't extend at that point, so we basically had to leave in a bit of a gale, and so us and various other boats ended up in outside Plymouth with really quite strong conditions for our first sort of shakedown first night, where I think Tim first of all ended up on someone else's boat who'd got closer and closer to the rocks, and they just needed someone else to bring up, one person to bring up the anchor and the other to be on the helm, or else it would have been a bit close to the rocks. So it wasn't quite as tranquil a start as this picture shows, but we did slowly start to make our way from that point on.
Yeah, so actually, anybody that's in the UK, I appreciate this. We've got people all around the world on this talk, but anybody that's in the UK may remember that early April, actually most of April and May, was really settled. The clarity of the water was amazing, and we were really lucky to have got going early. Actually, we'd actually winterized the boat. We put new insulation in, new heating, so we were all set for a bit of an early season start. This is just outside Plymouth. Some of you may recognise it going up to Dandy Hole. And so by now we are, we're having, this is a campfire on the shores outside on the Salcombe Estuary, but we're at bump factor 2 at the moment, just about showing. And Emmie's mum had actually told us that we were particularly lucky getting going early, because the flowers going up through Cornwall would be amazing, and it really was. It was just, it really is just amazing, all the walks and the woods, and on top of that is the all of the gardens that you get in Cornwall, like Tresillic, Treeboard, Durgan, up the Helford Passage, and we've just got,
Cornwall's got quite its own, well, parts of it have got quite its own microclimate, so there's some very interesting species which grow there, but also just wild all over the place is garlic, which you can cook, well, wild garlic you can cook, and we made soups, and well, it was wild garlic for a couple of weeks, I think, and all different sorts of varieties of meals.
Yeah, and we were actually getting the water was really clear, so actually we were fishing quite a lot and getting quite a lot in the pot. Anyway, here's a quick snapshot. So the other thing that we've taken to recently, since getting our electric outboard, is what we call tootling. We just set the outboard to about 10% and go up the estuaries. So whether it be Salcombe or Foy or Plymouth or Helford, and just pootle around silently, maybe with like a little picnic. And anybody that hasn't enjoyed the benefits of an electric outboard, I would urge you to give it a go.
Lady of leisure. You right there?
Tootling. It's just the sound of birds and some noisy seagulls up the Helford River.
Okay. Well, I'll try and whistle through these, because I appreciate everyone's come here for a talk on the Scilly. It's not a talk on Cornwall, but yeah, just enjoyed some empty anchorages early in the season.
That was Atlantic Bay?
Atlantic Bay, yep, outside Foy. And getting a little fun in where we can.
Sail and fly.
Sail and fly. Stairway to heaven. It's like some remote Costa Rican beach.
Tim manages to land just amongst some young Spanish tourists at that point who are all
Some young Spanish female tourists.
yeah.
Right. So the next little thing that happened was we put our dinghy on the side on a little beach near Falmouth and walked around the headland for a little walk, came back and the tide had come up and we couldn't get back to the dinghy because it was tucked on this beach. So we ended up knocking on the door of a random house, asking if we could jump their fence and cross their garden to get to their beach. Anyway, the chap who answered the door was David, and he said to us, should I grab that? Sorry, we're getting so David answered the door and said to us, yeah, absolutely, no problem, come along. What are you doing? Where are you going? And they said, oh, we're on a boat, we're down there and we're going to the Scillies actually. So David said, oh, well, coincidentally, I happen to have wrote the anchorage and an anchorage guide for the Scillies. Why don't you buy a copy? So we gladly did. We thrust 10 quid into his hand and got a signed copy of the anchorage guide and got talked through it. We then obviously exchanged details and then met him and Judith further along in the year when they sailed out there. So David and Judith have a vast amount of experience in the Scillies, as I think Simon alluded to. They've been there countless times and know every single rock by heart, it seems. Perhaps when we get onto the Scillies, they can correct me when I'm wrong. And another thing I've just noticed, I keep calling the Isles of Scilly the Scillies, and they will be getting me for this afterwards. You are not allowed to call the Isles of Scilly the Scillies. It's got to be the Isles of the Scillies or just Scilly. So I apologise if I'm offending anyone from the Isles of Scilly. I know I'm going to get a clip around the ear from David after this. Okay, so I'll just make a little note on this. So there is Harbours and Anchorages of Scilly by David Eastman, Volume 1. And we together, using a bit of my photography and a little bit of my experience of the Scillies, along with all of his notes over the last 30 years, we're going to put together Volume 2, Harbours and Anchorages of the Scillies by David and Tim. So that will be ready by spring, and anybody that's watching this, we have a record of that. We can get a copy of this half price in spring, and the price, the half bit that you do pay, is going to go to charity, to a foundation that I'm a trustee of called Reef World. They do amazing work in protection of coral reefs, both abroad and in the UK. And that would be great if you could support us on that, and you'll get a copy at half price as well. So, okay, right, Isles of Scilly. We sailed there straight from Falmouth, and in that guide there is mentions of timing that with the tide to shoot yourself around the Lizard if you're coming from that direction. If you're coming from the Azores, then it is what it is. You get there whenever. And so St. Mary's is the biggest island. I'm not entirely sure. Simon, could you unmute? Could you tell me if you're seeing my cursor?
Yes, we are, Tim.
Okay, great. I can use that moving forward. So St. Mary's is the largest, and you've then got St. Agnes down here. Briar, Tresco, which is actually a private estate, which I'll get onto, and then St. Martin. So they're the inhabited islands. You've then got off islands and Eastern Isles and St. Helens and various other things on top of that. So I'll keep on coming back to this map. And so I'm going to use this talk as a bit of a guide for those who want to go to the Scillies, and those of you who have been to the Scillies. A lot of this you will know, but perhaps you'll find some of it a bit fun as well. So the Scillies are approximately 30 miles off Land's End, have their own little microclimate, which is why they get completely different plants there. And we'll start with St. Mary's, given that is generally speaking where most people end up making landfall. So anchorage-wise, St. Mary's is the largest island, and it's got the largest town on, which is Hugh-town, which is here, and the airport, which is over here. So generally speaking, it's good place to make landfall because you've got two anchorages on either side of the town that, generally speaking, will give you a good option in most weathers. You've got Porth Cressida down at the bottom here. You've got the kind of town anchorage up at the top here, which is just outside. You've then got Watermill Cove up here, and then you've got some outlying anchorages which generally most people don't use, but if you're a bit adventurous you can. So the white anchors that I've in this talk are going to be your general, more well-known anchorages, and your red ones are your outliers, your more adventurous ones. Some of them are drying, but I'll mention that. Okay, so there's a top down of Hugh-town, and I just thought some of it might be useful for somebody that's going to visit. You have got the visitor moorings, of which there are tons, and they're huge on the side here, which, yeah, the north side of Hugh-town. You can actually see where the anchor chains were. I was talking to David about this, about how mooring chains can damage the seagrass, and you can see that actually exactly there where the mooring chains have created circles in the bed. Anyway, you've got a water pontoon along here, which is enough for 2 boats unless you raft. Generally speaking, people try and get there right at the beginning of the tide. So if you leave it on a falling tide, most people have gone. So a kind of after high tide, we generally found that you're not really queuing up and you can get in there quite easily. Next to it is the dinghy park. There are pontoons there. Gas can be in short supply, so you can get that right behind the actual main building there. Anchorage on the south side as well, and laundry and gas is there, also run by this company called Sibley's. This talk, by the way, for anybody that is visiting the Scillies, is going to be recorded, so you'll be able to recap on this stuff. And I couldn't take any drone shots of St. Mary's because the airport restricts flying, and yet I can't even actually take my drone off at all. It just won't allow it. But Emmie managed to capture this when she flew back to the mainland for a scan, and you can see this is the North Town anchorage here. So you can't anchor any closer than this, but there's a perfectly good anchorage there, and the patch of sand also there. So St. Mary's, we feel it's a bit underrated, really, that loads of people generally say, oh, their favourite is either Tresco or Briar or St. Martin's, and often kind of arrive, particularly visitors from the mainland on the ferry will arrive and then go elsewhere. But we found St. Mary's to be really good. There's lots of honesty boxes where you can pick up provisions and fresh produce, and loads of hidden gems of little gardens, communal gardens that we're not entirely sure who owns, but they're almost like little botanic gardens of their own if you hunt around. And then there's bird reserves as well. And a really good way of getting around is to go to the cycle shop and rent some bicycles. These are actually our folding bikes that we take on board, but there is a bike shop that's fully stocked.
And there's very little traffic on the road.
Yeah, no traffic at all almost.
Which makes cycling lovely.
Did you see the Shetland ponies?
Random little glade.
we sailed past here the other day. There's actually a sandbar, which that boat has just gone over. And we're doing a little circumnavigation of St Mary's by bicycle, which is full of flowers. And birds are singing. And the tide's going down, so we're getting a slightly more sandy beaches also coming up, which look, the colours are amazing.
And she is off. This chambered tomb, an example of a Sicilian grave entrance grave, was probably built 4,000 years ago, when the island landscape would have looked very different from today.
Oh gosh. Watch it! Oh my god.
So that rope swing is literally the best rope swing in the world, and it's right next to Watermill Cove. And that is a good enough reason just to go to Watermill Cove for anchorage to use the swing. And if you're really skillful, you can actually jump from the top, one of the top branches, swing out, do a circle, and land back on the place you landed. So that's.
And David and Judith went on it too.
And David and Judith went on it also. Yeah.
And your dad.
And my dad, who is probably watching as well. And did Julie go?
Probably.
I think my mum went. I can't
Multiple.
remember. She probably did. She's game for most of them. Okay, right. Next one in order, in clockwise order. St Agnes. So St Agnes, it's people's favourite actually. Quite a lot of the time when we ask, anchorage opportunities, not that many, but they are good. So from a top down, you have got the Cove here, which is really popular. But if you're willing to sneak yourself in and just have a few centimetres under the keel, you can tuck in right up against the beach. And if you're shoal draft, then even better, you can get right up there and out of the way of most of the other boats. And you've then got Porthconga on the north side, very rarely used, to be honest. But again, if you're shoal draft, you can get in there or anchor a bit further out. You just don't really see that many boats in there. We did try St Warner's Cove and Port Allen down here. It has a lot of potential, but there is a big fat rock right in the middle, and we did actually snag our anchor. So if you do decide to go in there, I would put a tripping line in. Otherwise, it's just not.
We had quite a stressful half an hour trying to get the anchor back up with it stuck, and the water's quite dark, so you can't really see down into it amongst the seaweed.
Yeah, I was really not happy about getting my diving stuff on to go down and try and free the anchor, but fortunately it came up by itself. Stupid us for not putting a tripping line in an unknown anchorage. So there's the Cove, and you can clearly see there's plenty of sand up here, but generally speaking, the holding's pretty good. So you walk up through here, and again, there's a few honesty boxes, a little shop, an amazing pub called the Turk's Head. And apparently, someone might be able to correct me on this, but apparently there were marauding Turkish pirates back in the 16th century, and I think some of them settled on St Agnes, and so after a bit of breeding, the people on St Agnes had slightly darker skin. That's what I heard. Another reason to go to St Agnes would be they've got a farm there, a dairy farm, and you can get freshly made ice cream, you can get milk, and a little secret that might be helpful is that when Hewtown runs out of gas and they can't give you any Calor or camping gas bottles, the campsite at the farm often does have some. So there's a little sneaky tip. Okay, Briar. Briar is to the west of Tresco. It is not privately owned, or it is not owned as an estate like Tresco. So it is this one. Yeah. Fourth biggest. I've got down my notes, 80 people call it home. It has a little basic chandlery. It has boat hire, so you can hire those island pilots, really, really lovely little gaff-rigged little dinghies that you can sail around the archipelago. There's a fish shop, some artist studios, an honesty boxes, plus what was there? Can we get meat there?
Farm shop, yeah.
A farm shop, like an honesty farm shop with fresh island beef in the freezer. And oh, hang on, to replay this one through. Sorry, guys, I didn't realize I'd have to wait for it to fade in. Okay, so that's Briar. You've got the two main anchorages off Briar. You've got Old Grimsby at the top here. That's kind of shared between Tresco. So you've got mooring buoys and an anchorage, and generally speaking, the majority of people plonk themselves in there because it's pretty good protection all around, but you do get a bit of swell coming up from the west there. You've then got Rushy Bay down here on this side. Again, pretty good, but can get quite a bit of chop in if there's a little bit of south in the air. You've got a drying anchorage up at the top here in, oh God, I can't remember that. David, if his mic was unmuted, would be able to tell me the name of every single rock within that anchorage, as well as the name of the anchorage. Down at the bottom, you've got probably, maybe what's your favorite anchorage in Scilly?
Maybe the
Eastern Isles. Okay, this is probably my favorite anchorage at the bottom here. Great Porth, or you've got Great Porth here and Stinking Pool next to it. So David named it Stinking Porth, I think. But that's a really fantastic anchorage that very few people go into if you can negotiate yourself through the rocks. And you can see here, it's just lovely. There's just nobody else there. There's people over in Rushy Bay, and there's people in the drying anchorage, but there's nobody in this one. It's a little bit tight and a little bit shallow. So on springs with our 2 meter draft, we can't really get in there, but for anyone less, you can. And if not, you can just move a little bit down. This gives you just a bit of perspective over the island. There's a hotel here with a bar, and there are growing succulents around here that you can buy, and there's honesty boxes along there. You've then over here got the main anchorage of Old Grimsby, where, as you can see, loads of people have chosen to be. And you've then got fish shops and a restaurant, a cafe, and a couple of other honesty boxes along here, and then an actual shop. So we really liked Briar. It was just really quaint. The people were super friendly, really nice walking, not busy at all, just great. And I really wanted to hire one of those little diggies of the island pilots, but we never got a chance in the end. But yeah, Briar's possibly my second favorite island, I think. And here's one of the little succulent farms that they have there.
Succulent.
They are actually farming them there, but to be fair, out of any stone wall, you've got all sorts of stuff. These are just growing wild everywhere and out of any garden wall. So moving on, we've got Tresco. That is an estate owned, about 80 people live on it. And, oh God, we've got to go through this thing again. Actually, I'm not sure if 80 people do live on Tresco, because it is a managed estate that's owned by, well, it's owned by the Duchy of Cornwall, but leased to the Dorian Smith family, who then run it as a timeshare estate. And it was, I think it was the main island that was home to a lot of marauding pirates back in the day. Benedictine monks who made it their home in the 10th century. And like the other islands, it's got burial chambers which are about 4,000 years old. So let's take a look at the anchorages. We've got really the two main ones are Old Grimsby here, which I mentioned is used for Briar as well, and then New Grimsby on this side. Holding in New Grimsby, not bad, bit kelpy. You kind of want to make sure you're set really. A couple of times it hasn't set for us, but it's not bad. You've then got a couple of other minor anchorages, a bit of a shoal draft drying anchorage here, another one off to the south next to a quay, which is pretty good, and then another one up in the north, which our good friend Murray always uses. He sails around a lot single-handed around the UK and beyond, and he often, when he visits the Scillies, makes that his first port of call, which is surprisingly well protected, even though you look and it looks like it's exposed. It's actually pretty good. There are moorings also along here outside New Grimsby on this side of the island. So that is the anchorage in.
Just to interject for a moment.
Yeah.
It's New Grimsby is to the west, and Old Grimsby is to the east.
You are quite right. Yeah. Sorry, I literally just thought that as you said it.
And the bay you were talking about was Green Bay on Briar.
Okay, great. Please do just chip in and correct me whenever I get it wrong. So yeah, so that's the anchorage out on Old Grimsby side. And as you can see at that time, well, I don't know, that was actually August and there was still nobody there, but anyway. So the other thing on Tresco, one of the highlights is the gardens there, which, well, I'll let the video talk for itself, but I mean, we visited a lot of the decent gardens in Cornwall, but this just, yeah, exceeded them all.
are in Tresco Gardens, full of flowers, and what else has it got?
Trees.
And shell houses and plants from all over the world, including the Canaries actually, so we kind of recognise them from around there. Beautiful colours. Fatty.
Oh.
What's that bump factor for? Yes, it's the gardens there. They very pretty much never get a frost, which is why they have managed to grow what they have grown there. However, we were there and someone told us that they did once get a frost back in the 80s or something, which caused absolute havoc and killed off something like half of the species in one go, but it all bounced back again, and since then they haven't had another one.
Just to add to, and Tresco is actually, historically, it's been really important in the Scillies because when ships started to call there in the 13th century, it was when locals started to sell them fresh water and vegetables, meat, beer, and also boat repairs were done. Pilotage was often used because the islands are so treacherous. We'll maybe go on a bit more about shipwrecks later on.
I didn't actually put in anything about the Valhalla Museum.
Oh.
Say something about that.
Well, so an absolute highlight is the museum as part of these gardens, which have some of the remnants and the figureheads from various from wrecks from the past. It's really poignant. The stories are shown. I think what's clear with a lot of the stories is that the wrecks were, a lot of them were early 18th century, and due to the fog and before navigation was as precise as it is today, and there was a spate of hundreds of there's hundreds of shipwrecks. The Isles of Scilly actually have probably over 1,000 shipwrecks amongst them. It's one of the most described as some of the most treacherous area due to this, and that's partly to do with so many shipping routes which are around there, and lighthouses saved some people, but a mixture of the seas and submerged rocks and reefs have brought many casualties.
There was one occasion where a not an armada, but I don't know what the terminology is, flotilla or whatever, of ships went aground, and there was something like loss of life of 1,500 seamen in one sitting, basically.
So, yeah, that was a naval disaster. There were 4 ships which were involved in total.
Yeah.
This was on the Western Isles, which we're not going to talk about with anchorages because you can visit there, but you can't anchor. So that is something to bear in mind with the Scillies, is that there are restricted areas, not just to do with historical wrecks, but to do with nature reserves. It's interesting sailing around there though, because you may well go at a time where it's really calm and it's beautiful and these rocks come out, and then you start to read the history of how treacherous these rocks are in bad weather, particularly historically because of the mapping at the time. It was
the association, actually, that's the main vessel that went down there. So we actually sailed out there and anchored off the island that the association was wrecked on, but you just sat there trying to imagine in your mind's eye what it would have been like with thousands of I think it was thousands of, at least hundreds from that ship alone, just of men just floundering, and just not a single man from that ship was actually saved anyway.
And meanwhile then there's there's quite a big seal colony who are there. So initially we were enjoying the tranquility and the seals before learning a little bit more about the historical context, and that only during this particular time that only 24 people were saved as the ships were coming back. They thought they were off France, and in fact they were.
There'll be somebody listening to this webinar that knows a lot more about the association and that, and it might be good for them to chip in afterwards.
It's pretty interesting, yeah.
So we're going to do St. Martin's at the top here. I think my favourite island, perhaps, and a number of reasons for that, really. But just for those that might be wanting to visit the Scillys, a bit of useful info. You have got, you've got St. Helens Pool over here, which I'll touch on later. But you have got Great Bay at the top here. You've got
Teen Sound.
Yes, that's it. Say again, Teen Sound, yes. And up here, David, Higher Town. No, the Higher Town Bay is here. Bull's Paw, Bread and Cheese Cove. Anyway, the main ones really of St. Martin's are opposite the hotel here and Great Bay at the top here, and we actually love it up here. Not that many boats go up there, and there's no mobile phone reception. Perhaps that's why, I don't know, but there's no mobile phone reception. You just feel like you're cut off, and this is where the fishing is. You've got along the reefs over here, you've got plenty of pollock. They hang out on the outskirts of the isles. You're not going to catch, well, we didn't catch a single thing inside the islands or inside any of the other anchorages, but from there you can go out and catch pollock off the reefs quite easily. You've got loads of really nice honesty boxes in St. Martin's for fresh veg. There's an amazing bakery. There's award-winning fish and chips. There's the Seven Stones pub that's fantastic, also locally run. And then there's the hotel on the side, which we haven't actually been in, but I don't know, if you want friends to visit, they could stay there rather than in Hewtown.
All the islands have amazing walking as well, so you've got fairly easy access from Great Bay onto the island, and there were lots of foxgloves and all the just beautiful flowers. The Scillys have got quite a big trade now in growing flowers, so, and a lot of those have just spread naturally also into the wild.
That is Bread and Cheese Cove on the north side, which is a really nice spot. That's the main Great Bay anchorage, and actually one of the places we weathered the first storm of this year, which I'll allude to later. There's a fantastic beach basically all along here that's pretty empty most of the time, frankly. And we spent quite a lot of time there. We found a lot of the old folk boats and a lot of the old working boats would come in and use this anchorage, perhaps because it was quite easy to access and quite well sheltered, rather than trying to work their way into St. Helens Pool or into New or Old Grimsby. But that was nice, because at one point we had 4 or 5 of them in there. And bit of pollock. Apologise to the vegans who are watching this.
So we got lemon marinated pollock with garlicky creamy sauce and
Loomy barbecue bites.
And curry mayo, and a beautiful anchorage.
there were lots of versions of pollock during the summer, which some people are not too keen on. But I think particularly if you curried pollock or
you did it really nice just with tomatoes, and that was it.
Or baked
I don't
tomatoes
mind
and
pollock at all. I can't really tell the difference between pollock and cod, frankly.
balsamic vinegar and.
But yeah, it was pollock or nothing, pretty much. Okay, so that is all of the inhabited islands done. Then we have a few outlying places to go as well. So Eastern Islands, your favourite? Did you say?
Well, because of the seals.
Because of the seals, yeah. Well, the Eastern Islands are really good. I think David really likes the Eastern Islands as well, which I'm sure he could touch on later. But we actually made landfall there. If you're coming from the east, you're often coming perhaps with an easterly, in which case it might not be right. But if you've got a northerly or you're beating up to a northwest, then it's a really good place to just make landfall, and loads of room to anchor, and really not that many people because most of them head to St. Helens Pool. You can see us sailing up to the islands there. We would often tootle around, just really gently sail between the islands. We'd maybe stay, I don't know, probably only stay a couple of days in each anchorage. Maybe once or twice we stayed a week or so. But
well, due to conditions, then you have to keep on moving from place to place so that you have a calm anchorage. So all in all, the Scillys do offer a safe haven in pretty much all conditions, but you do need to be moving around to enjoy those. The Eastern Isles are particularly nice though because they are uninhabited and do have a sense of what wilderness about them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Emmie's right there. You do need to keep on moving around depending on the conditions. In St. Helens Pool, you can mostly stay put, but the other anchorages you generally just have to move around. But it's great because the sailing is fantastic there, and you can just take your time and just make sure you've got the tide tables right, and you're not going to hit any of the numerous sandbanks or rocks. We're on to bump factor 5 by now. Just a quick update on that one. So it's kind of hard to explain why we like the Eastern Islands, so I just put together a few clips just to kind of illustrate the wilder side of why we like to spend up time out there. Okay. Most of the islands, as far as I know, are bird reserves, but you can make landfall in a couple of places. For example, on Great Ganilli here, there's 2 beaches, which you actually saw in that video, which are really nice. And to be honest, you don't really need to walk on the rest of the island. They're so nice. You can also land up here. There's also a little beach here you can land on, but generally speaking, the rest of it's off limits for walking. And the main anchorage is slap bang in the middle. Absolutely tons of room to swing, even though you just don't get that many boats there, to be honest. Couple of outlying anchorages. This one out here, well, that's the main anchorage there, where you can go right away up here, or you can go over here. I mean, there's just loads of room, to be honest. That's another shot of the main anchorage opposite Great Ganilli.
It is funny seeing those drone footages actually, because because at the time I always felt like we were quite close to the rocks at times.
Yeah.
And now I realize that we definitely weren't.
And the thing is, it changes so much. Sometimes you can be in a little anchorage and you'll think you're really tucked away and you've got islands all around you, and then the tide will come up like it is here, and suddenly you look quite exposed and out in the open.
Well, and overall the Scillies are actually quite shallow, and very tidal compared to a lot of places. So it's really, it really takes a bit of working out and to get from one place to another in some cases.
Just go back there. So you've got a little anchorage on the east over here, which we actually haven't seen anyone in, but we did try it. And that is this one. Not even going to try and pronounce it. Well, maybe I will. Great Innisfowls. And yeah, that was quite a nice one for a little while. And it's very easy to go snorkeling from there. Also quite an atmospheric place to get stuck in the fog, which we did for a few days. We actually didn't have much fog, to be honest, just a few days of it, but it's pretty nice. So the other thing that you can do in the Scilly Isle, in the Eastern Isles, is to go and visit the seal colony. I'll just go back here, seal here. And you can, just take your dinghy across to it. And really along these rocks here are where they all hang out. And quite a few people know about this, and the seals have become pretty relaxed about you being there. Obviously, you want to give them a bit of respect and don't encroach on them too much. But if you kind of take your dinghy off, 100 yards away and get in, then usually this is what happens. Sorry, I might just add, when you go down there, often you can't see the seals, and it's because they're following you and they stick right behind you. So you're looking just left and right and you're searching around. And it took me about 10 minutes to try and find any seals. And Emmie's on the surface, wetting herself because the seals are actually following me. And I didn't even realize.
So the seals, we allowed the seals to approach us. We tried not to go too close to them. And there's one who's particularly friendly and really playful. So where you could see with the ropes, there was a mooring, there was a diving rope which was there. And I think we learned afterwards that the seal may well have been released from a sanctuary off Cornwall after it had been injured. So that may have been why it was actually quite used to seeing people and quite playful.
Around.
Yeah.
Yeah, although that first time it had a tag on, but the second time, the one that was biting my fins when I was diving didn't. So I think one might have been a release, but the other one perhaps wasn't. So anyway, if you do go, don't worry about them. They're a bit like Labradors. They'll put their mouth on something like your fins or your gloves or whatever, but they don't. We never found or haven't heard of them actually biting. They just kind of nibble. If you want to take my word for it. The other one, I think we'll just mention St. Helens Pool because of the fact that it is arguably possibly the most popular anchorage. It's protected from all sides. You can pretty much endure any wind direction in St. Helens Pool. It consists of not only the main pool here, but also kind of runs down here. And arguably, I actually think further down here is better because you haven't got as much kelp. It can be a bit crowded. There were times when we were anchored over in the Eastern Islands and we're the only boat there, and we could see 20 or 30 boats in St. Helens Pool, particularly when the weather got bad. Everybody flocked there, and in fact it was actually the number of boats there that contributed to some problems, which I'll allude to later.
The island just pictured here, I think, it used to be a quarantine island, so when people would come back with yellow fever, then they would get, or maybe cholera, would get put on the island and pretty much left to die. So again, it has a bit of a tragic. The building is still there,
past. Isn't it? The ruins.
Yeah.
So you can, just to say, like, a lot of people will come from the east at a certain tide to enter St. Helens Pool, a half tide, rising tide. But there is St. Helens Gap at the top here, which not as many people use, but it's totally doable. You can squeeze through there at most states of the tide. The chart does show it at about only 1 meter, but we've been through there at low tide and drawn 2 meters, and we were fine.
We might need to speed up a bit, I think, because we've still got quite a few.
Okay, we'll try and speed things up.
Should we get onto the storm?
And I'll just mention Teen as well. Teen is a lovely island with some really lovely beaches and a drying anchorage, which is really quite popular for those lucky enough to have shoal draft boats. And you've got St. Helens Pool down here, and there's a passage through, deep water passage through here, and you can tuck into here, either for a lunch at high tide, or you can actually dry out there. But Teen is a really nice uninhabited island. The other one is Sampson, which is uninhabited, which is next to Briar up here and Tresco here. You've got the passage through here that you would generally reach the New Grimsby anchorage and moorings. But Sampson itself is actually a really interesting island, and has got this lovely spit of beach out here. One main anchorage at the top that's generally used between Puffin Island and Yellow Rock, but there are two others, one on the west port, on the west, believe it or not, and also a drying anchorage that we used, which we didn't see anybody else use on Sampson Flats, but I think it's probably one of the best drying anchorages of the whole of the Scillies, frankly, because it's just so easy and so picturesque. But that's the first more popular anchorage. And yeah, you've actually got Shadowfax here and Moonshot here. That's David and Judith's boat. And we went on shore and had a very lovely barbecue and heard lots of stories from those guys. Got lots of tips. You've then got on the other side, Westport. Again, just barely anybody uses it. It's a good anchorage and it can be susceptible to some swell from the west, but if there isn't any, then, you know, go for it, and there's nobody else there really. You can see the remnants of some old farms and settlements up on Sampson, but it's no longer inhabited. And the other one, yeah, so is Samson Flats. So if you've got a shoal draft or drying boat, then there's this perfect, huge area of totally flat sand. And what's nice here is that the flats themselves, give or take half a meter, are pretty much the same depth as this line called Samson Passage. I'm not entirely sure if it's actually known as Samson Passage, but that's what I called it. And you can come in through here and to the flats and out there, and if you can basically enter, you're pretty much good for the rest of it. I've walked to this at low springs, and there's no obstacles as long as you don't hit these reefs there. I can share that I'll share that actually in the volume 2 of the book about the transits and stuff. Anyway, we're on bump factor 7 at this point, probably July now. And yeah, so that's the drying anchorage there. There's just masses of room. You just can't go wrong if you're on, particularly if you're on legs like we are. We want to be a little bit more cautious when we're drying out. I need to mention storms and anchoring in the Scillies. I think some people are a little bit nervous to visit the Scillies because of that. You get westerly systems coming from the southwest, which is the prevailing, into the Scillies, and you can get a bit battered. Now, generally speaking, there are anchorages, if you've got a good forecast, to deal with bad weather in the Scillies. However, the biggest problem arises really when you get one of these systems passing right overhead, which inevitably does happen because these systems often are coming in from the southwest, and if they're not passing over island and they go a little bit further south, they can pass straight over the top of you, which leads you to having a lull in the mid. You'll get, you know, it coming from one direction and then a bombshell hitting you from the other direction. And this actually happened twice this summer. The first time we were there, and it was carnage, really. Well, both times were carnage, and there were quite a few boats that were swept around. Some went on the rocks, the lifeboat had to be called out twice, and then the second time, actually on July 29th, the Senon lifeboat had to come out to assist, and the helicopter. So I just thought I would touch on this. If you're going to remain in the Scillies while something like this happens, there's a few things that I think is useful to know. So this was actually the first storm that we had when it came in. It literally blew from, it was about, it blew kind of southeast to begin with, pretty strong, and then with the eye of it went over, it went dead still, really calm for about an hour or so, and then a northwest bombshell hit, and well, I don't know, we were reading over 50 knots at the time. This gives you an idea using the Arome model, which is the highest resolution available on Windy, but it gives you a much better indication of what it will do when it hits, as opposed to a GFS or ECMWF model, which generally shows a bit more of a rounded picture like that. But that shows you that when the eye, in this case, this one did pass a little bit lower than what this is suggesting, but you can see how this line can hit. And that's exactly what happened when we were there. I could do with going back actually and showing you where we anchored, but really what we did is, actually I'll just flip through these and then I'll get onto the anchoring afterwards. But using those models, you can see how a bombshell might come in after a lull, and that's the problem in the Scillies. When you're set, you've got your anchor set one way, and then it comes in and hits the other way. Plenty of people in the OCC have sailed big distances around the world and may have been stuck in tropical storms and have witnessed this, but perhaps not in quite as tighter anchorages as in the Scillies with lots of boats. Yeah, that was the late July one. Both of them ended up with boats on the rocks. That one, well, I mean, I'm not going to go into which one happened when, but that actual lower right-hand side picture is some people being heli-lifted outside. I believe that's outside Hugh Town. All of these really were preventable without, you know, I don't want to kind of get on my high horse about it, but they were. So let's just look at, for example, St. Helens Pool, and let's look at some of the other anchorages. Firstly, St. Helens Pool, you can drop your anchor in it and you can set it in one direction perfectly well. The problem is when the wind comes over and changes direction, particularly if it's a 180-degree shift, and it happens very quickly, it will pull your anchor out and it will reset, or not reset, as is the case with St. Helens Pool, because you can clearly see there it is weedy. There's a lot of kelp. And I'm going to read you a message here from a couple on Bora Bora who had that exact problem. So we were actually anchored over in St. Martin's on the sand here. We purposely wanted to make sure we're anchored in sand. And at about 1 a.m., this bombshell came through, and we heard all sorts of people on the radio radioing that they had couldn't reset their anchor. And what ended up happening is a few boats held, and lots of other boats in the anchorage ended up motoring around in circles with so much weed on their anchors that their windlass couldn't even power it. So I'll just read what Bora Bora said, and I know they weren't the only ones. We'd never had a problem with weed or holding in St. Helens Pool until we did when there was a wind shift at 180 degrees, at which point our rottner didn't reset because we'd started to drag and we were forced to motor into the wind. We'd gathered loads of weed and it wasn't safe to bring the anchor up on deck. We couldn't even use our, we couldn't even get it up with our windlass. I'll just move on a bit. Basically, they were left motoring around in circles in the dark, and there were other boats there without sufficient anchor lights on, so it was all a bit treacherous. And once the light came up, then some of them moved off and some of them got help getting the weed off. But in this case, you know, you're better off, in my opinion, you're better off somewhere that you aren't going to gather weed, and try an anchor somewhere on sand so that when there is a shift, your anchor has a chance to reset without gathering anything up. So let's just look also at Google Earth. Some people don't know that you can actually change Google Earth. This is Google Earth, not Google satellite view in maps. This is a 2019 image of the north of St. Martin's. Doesn't give you a whole lot of resolution, but you can kind of see the sand. If you use Google Earth and switch between the different years, you get a much better view. And we use that on a number of occasions to spot sand and anchor in places that perhaps you weren't really sure of. And in this case, we anchored off for the first part of the storm here. And when the lull came over, we moved when it was absolutely dead calm and reset our anchor in the new position up here to give ourselves different protection. So I would say in the Scillies, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the converted here because there's loads of some very experienced people, but there might be some people that are nervous about anchoring in the Scillies and what to do if there's some bad weather. So hopefully this might come in handy for some. I would say do try and anchor in sand if there's going to be a big wind shift. Take your head sails down, because the windage on your head sails, particularly us, which are a cutter rigs, we've got two sails up there, makes an enormous difference to our boat in terms of sailing around and snatching. A modern anchor such as spade, rottner, you know, that sort of thing is obviously great. No 3 times depth is not enough. 5 times depth is not enough. You know, pay out more if you can, obviously, within reason. I would say lift, if if you're going to stay in one place and you are expecting 180-degree bombshell wind shift, then lift your anchor, plop it back down during the lull, and reset it in the direction that the wind is going to come from. Because when it came for us, we were up here and it was 5 knots of wind, gently tootling around, and then at 1 in the morning, 50 knots came literally within a minute, and the boat next to us dragged right the way down here and very nearly went on to here. And he had gone to sleep and hadn't reset his anchor, and it just dragged, and he just kept on dragging all the way down here. He ended up repositioning himself over here once he got to grips with it. So yeah, again, apologies for preaching to the converted on that one, but maybe it'll be useful for some. Right, very quickly, where's Wally? Some of you don't know, but there was a walrus that happened to be in the Scillies when we were there, and he had climbed on all sorts of boats. He did try and climb up our boat once at 6 a.m. in the morning, but here he is on his little pontoon in the Scillies. Scilly Isles, sorry.
Hi, Wally.
Holy cow! Did they make that for him? Yeah.
Wally, Wally.
Yeah. Oh, bless him.
We did actually also we spent quite a lot of time using our electric outboard to go around the Scillies, and we've done a little trip around to see how far we could go on the electric outboard, and a little camping trip. I kind of feel like we haven't really got time to show it, so I'm just going to skip that. But if anybody is interested in it, we'll put it on our website about the electric outboard and how long we can go. But generally, basically, we went 2 days using it with a camping trip, and we still had charge at the end of it. So I'll just get that all bump back to 9 now. So Emmie is now 8 months pregnant and getting towards the end of the trip when we think we should make a run for it, just in case the little one decides to come early. So the other thing is, as you know, some of Emmie is an artist. We've shown some of her work.
Where do you store your paintbrushes?
On the other webinars.
Up here, apparently.
Oh.
More.
Handy access.
Yeah.
So Emmie decided that on this trip she would actually start a commission, which was her largest commission. Not largest in terms of value, but largest in terms of size. Is it the largest piece you've done?
No, it's intricate.
Most
but
intricate.
I was going to finish it before leaving.
Right. So she ended up bringing it, and quite a big piece to work on in the cabin. But this is a collaboration of all sorts of different parts of the world for a private commission. And this is the final piece that she completed in the Scillies. It's pretty large. I don't know, a few meters across.
Fantastic.
So it's got it's got all sorts of stuff in it. It's got Istanbul, London, Tokyo. What's the main mountain with the lift going up it? Mount Fuji. Emmie's telling me to hurry up. So here's some of the small pieces that she did from the fishing villages like Nevagissy and various little places. And that's actually Hewtown. Has that gone to gallery?
No,
Oh, she says she needs to finish it. Oh, so it's available then. Anyway, she did a whole series from the fishing towns and the Scillies that when we were there. And I think we're done. Simon?
Yes, Tim. I was just unmuting. Thank you very much indeed. Wonderful talk. I'm going to ask people to put their electronic hands up, and I just want to make a quick announcement while I'm doing that, while people are putting their hands up. Last week's talk was by Pam Wall. She had a wee bit of a problem with the slides on that talk, and very happily we re-recorded it last night. So that's not yet up on the OCC website, but it will be soon. So if you want to see the illustrated version of last week's talk, tune in and you'll catch it. Tim and Emmie, thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. Multimedia as ever, video, artwork, performing seals. You've got some comments on the chat line, Tim, saying that actually quite a few people do get bitten by seals. Perhaps it's a good job you didn't realise that at the time. But what was that seal doing, wrapping itself up in a rope? That was extraordinary. You'd never seen anything quite like that before.
Well, I think he was just playing with it. I mean, on the picture, yeah, it looked like he was stuck in it, but he just came up and just started wrapping himself, and then would unwrap and wrap again, and yeah.
It was quite alarming at the time, but he did unwrap. We made sure he unwrapped himself. And it was obviously quite used to doing that. It was amazing.
Is it amazing?
Right. This is bump factor 10 now.
Fantastic. Martin Smith wants to ask a question. Come in, Martin.
Yeah, hi Tim and Emmie. That was a great talk, thanks. And we always think that the Scillies is the Isles of Scilly are one of the loveliest places we've been to. I just wondered whether you'd picked up any of the moorings in New Grimsby, because there used to be a bit of a problem with them being a bit too close together, and I think the last few times we went there we actually avoided the moorings and anchored just north of Hangman's Rock instead, because when the tide changed there's a danger of the boats swinging into each other. So I just wondered whether you picked up any of the moorings at all.
We did, and we did actually move because of that. We picked up one, and then we were a bit close, we felt, once it was kind of settled in. And then we moved to another one, which actually ended up being a bit shallow.
And we were trying to take it because there was bad weather coming in as well. So we actually kept up, we changed a couple of times and it just wasn't quite right.
Yeah. So yeah, we did find that. Yeah.
There's a question on the chat line, Tim and Emmie, from Kian Gallagher saying, after repeated anchoring in sand, did you notice any cable wearing on the chain linkages?
Sorry, could you say that one again?
After repeated anchoring on sand, did you notice a lot of wear on or chafe on the chain linkages?
No. I mean, we always try and anchor in sand. I think I'm not totally sure if I'm following the question. I mean, generally speaking, isn't that what everyone attempts to do?
Just repeating the question. It's yeah. But the answer is no, I think. Yeah. Somebody says my uncle swam out. This is Charles Godden says my uncle swam out to save a Labrador in distress, and when he got there, it disappeared. It was a seal.
They are like Labradors. They really are.
Liam McMahon says someone was badly bitten by a seal in the Scilly Islands, in Skerries on Ireland. I don't know when that was. And Sandy Garrity, any of these people are welcome to come in online and ask and state their question directly. But Sandy was saying there was a swimmer attacked in Plymouth Sound a week ago by a seal.
Really? Gosh. Okay.
Brian
Scrap that idea.
Brian O'Flynn says, never apologise to vegans, just enjoy the fish. Sandy Garrity again says, I'm sure there's an award-winning fish and chip restaurant in every village on the coast. I thought the fish and chip in Eyemouth, Scotland, did not live up to the award. Oh dear.
Well, the fish and chips on at least the fish and I remember going to award-winning fish and chips up in a village in East Yorkshire, which is where I'm from. And I asked them, I said, "Oh, is it locally caught, Bridlington or Scarby?" He goes, "No, every fish and chip shop gets it from the wholesaler now, and it could be from anywhere." And I was a bit disillusioned by that. But the fish from the fish and chip shop in St. Martin's is pollock that is caught, because the fish and chip shop is run by the fishermen on St. Martin's.
Sure.
And I am reliably told that it is pollock you're eating, and it is from the islands, of which there are plenty of pollock. I can personally give testament to that.
No shortage of pollock. Bob's got his hand up. Bob, go ahead.
Oh yes, well, Tim, I was rather surprised when it came to the storms that you didn't mention putting out 2 anchors. I don't mean in a V, but in Baffin Island, for instance, mountainous territory, where the wind kept going round and round, we had to put 1 anchor out at the bow and the other anchor out behind us. And by not too complicated a system, we joined up the 2 lines so they still came up to the bow roller. But in this way, when the wind went round to 180 degrees, we just lay to the other anchor, and actually this worked fine.
Yeah, and I can see David nodding here. We have used that more before, what Bahamian more, or
yeah.
The only problem is that we were expecting really strong winds from both directions, and if we had done that, then we would be relying on our secondary anchor, which would be our fortress. And if that had decided that it wasn't going to happen, we're then going to be left with 1 anchor dragging into the other one, and then a real mess getting it all up again. And I have had that once in the Med, where the wind switched and it ended up getting tangled. And personally, I'm a fan of a good modern style anchor, well set in advance, with the right scope and other things. I think simpler the better is my preference. But I agree, if you can get your 2 anchors in tandem and you can get them balanced right, I think it could be a good option. But I would be wary about the shift and then chains wrapping and tripping each other up, and you'd also want a fair amount of space, because if you've got other boats around you that are only on 1 anchor and you're on a Bahamian moor, then you've got the issue of you're not going to be swinging like the others. It's obviously a subjective thing, isn't it?
Bob would say to that, go somewhere where there's nobody else anchored, Tim. But
exactly, and that's what he does.
Funny you should say that. There wasn't anybody anywhere, no. Except Steve Brown turned up in Navarra one day. He was very shocked.
I think it would be good to get David and Judith's view on this, because they've done an awful lot of miles, and I think they obviously have an opinion on this and have sailed in the Scillies a lot more than I have. David, go ahead. You're muted at the moment.
Yeah, I think Tim touched on something very important, which certainly, it got me thinking tonight, and increasingly over the years, it's got me thinking. Some time ago, very few people anchored. Mostly they went to moorings, even strange moorings that they had no idea what the ground tackle was like, or they would go to marinas. People, I'm glad to say, are now anchoring, I think, a great deal more than they did. Certainly that's our experience down here. And that does lead to its own problems, because St. Helens Pool, which has been a favourite of mine for 60 years, until quite recently, there might be anything up to half a dozen boats anchored there, but come an hour before nightfall, and they all went back to St. Mary's, leaving us alone. whether it's me saying to everyone you should really use St Helens Pool, it's a good anchorage. If you're aware of the kelp, I can get your anchor set, but it's now very crowded. And if you get the sort of wind shifts which Tim was talking about, you do get a lot of boats sculling around and in many cases bumping into each other. I once had a celebrity glide into me at speed one night in St Mary's Harbour before they had moorings there. It's the other boats really become a big issue. You may be securely anchored, whether you're using the sort of moor that Bob was suggesting, or whether you're lying to your totally reliable anchor that Tim talks about. It doesn't much help if a couple of boats come dragging into you. What Tim did is I think, a very interesting thing. He moved to somewhere when other people weren't. He knew what the wind was going to do. He planned it and acted accordingly and had plenty of space around him. And I actually think that, you know, it's other boats that are often the danger, however securely oneself is fastened. Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, David. We were caught up in Hurricane Dorian in Nova Scotia a couple of years ago, and we had about 6 hours to decide where we were going to anchor, and we managed to find somewhere where there was only one other boat, and that was a tiny little trimaran that was almost aground. So we were able to swing in whatever direction we wanted, but it did take an awful long time to get the anchors up afterwards, I have to say. Tosti Tanhua, who's one of our speakers coming up in a couple of weeks' time, he's got a comment on. Do you want to open your microphone? And I think you're a panelist, so you can come in directly, Tosti.
Thank you, Simon. Sorry for having poor light here in my little office. Yeah, I've been cruising a little bit in California, and it seems like in Channel Islands particularly, it's more or less a law that you're going to use 2 anchors like that to prevent you from swinging. So that means that you pretty much have to do that. Otherwise, everybody else will swing, will not. I don't like it. It's a little bit of a hassle to put out anchors like that, particularly if it's good weather coming. There's nothing bad coming, but I guess in that way you could actually anchor a few more boats in a particular bay on a busy weekend, and if everybody was swinging. That's the comment from my side.
Thank you very much. And I think you're up for a talk. Is it 2 or 3 weeks' time? I can't remember.
I think it's 2 weeks, Simon. I'm sorry about the change of schedule, but it was really good that we didn't do the talk the time we had planned for. Yeah. I was at that time in Glasgow, being very busy at the climate negotiations, and that would have been a bad time to relax and talk about sailing, I think, for me.
It's no problem.
But I'm looking forward to give you a presentation on some of the work I'm doing with sailors on ocean science in, I think, 2 weeks.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bob's got his hand up again. Bob?
Can't get it off anyhow.
There you go, Bob. What's your question?
No, it's I don't know how to get it off.
Oh, I see. Okay. That's fine.
I mean, I got a lot of questions for Tim, but I better not start on them now.
We've got some comments. John Rapp says, we will be crossing from the US next June. Please remind us how to get the harbours and anchorages book. Tim?
So you can get David's already on Amazon. You can just type in anchorages and harbours of Scilly. and the volume 2, yeah, will be volume 2. So when we finished it, which we hope will be, I don't know, in February perhaps, then it'll just go onto Amazon. And I suppose when you type in anchorages and harbours and anchorages of Scilly, then it'll pop up. And yeah, I suppose we're hoping to do a digital version as well, if Amazon will allow us to do that kind of PDF download, which I think we can. But we're going to be doing a hardback and a digital version. But as I said before, anybody that's on this, we will have a record of everybody that was on here. So anybody that's on here and wants a copy of it at half price, and for that half to go to a decent cause, then they can contact me or David and get that, and we'll send it to them when it's ready.
Sure. And if you haven't got Tim's email address, just drop a line to me and I'll forward it on to him. A question from John Mallet. Having never seen beaching legs used, I would imagine they are very helpful but scary to use. I would agree with that. How do you find the stability? Cheers, John. I'm never contemplating putting beaching legs on our boat. Tell us about beaching legs.
Well, the French are very comfortable using them and use them regularly, but yeah, the Brits not so much. I had them on my first boat, was a little lifting keel Beneteau, so they're only short legs, and then these came up for sale secondhand, so I thought I'd get them. But my boat will. I've seen if you type beaching legs into Google, you'll see fin keel boats looking very precariously on them, and people swear by them, including a relatively well-known chap in the UK called Viv Cox. He uses them on a fin keel boat. But our boat, actually, I've asked them once in the slings in the yard to lower the boat down and just put it onto the concrete and let the slings go slack. I just wanted to see what would happen. And our boat just sat, and the keel is about that wide anyway, so it just kind of sat there without any slings. And I thought, well, the legs aren't going to do much, they're just going to stop you from toppling. So the force on the legs is very small, actually. I mean, so much so that when we're sat down, I can actually wind the legs and move the boat from one side to the other. But
what happens if you get some wind? If you get the kind of beam wind or something?
Yeah, I mean, you choose a settled day, and depending on the tides, generally speaking, if there's a bit of wind, you end up lying into wind whilst you're at anchor, and then you settle onto it. But I don't know. I've heard of people using them in higher wind, and once the weight is on the keel, any windage is just not hugely significant. I mean, I've only done it in settled weather, and that's all I'm willing to do.
Very, very wise, very wise. There's some more stuff. Thanks for the talk and offer of the half price edition. Let me know when it's ready. Kind regards, Alex Bowling. So, Alex, if you email, well, Tim will pick this up out of the chat line because I'll send that on. It's got the email address on. Couple of points from me, Tim. I'm glad you like St Martin's, great bay. That's one of the few bays we've been to in the Isles of Scilly. And sadly, we thought it was heaven because we arrived there in a southwesterly gale and just coming into the lee of St Martin. And so that
amazing,
glorious, kind of almost tropical beach.
Yeah,
she thought she really had arrived, and having crossed the Irish Sea or whatever it was, the wind against tide and all that sort of nonsense, it was completely fantastic. I want to ask you about kayaking. Our boat's on the wrong side of the Atlantic to go to the Scillies, but can you camp there, Tim?
Right, it's a good question. No.
Oh,
but yes. You're technically not meant to, apparently, but the whole of the Scillies is just so relaxed. There's not enough accommodation there for tourists to put enough pressure onto it that things become a problem. And the types of people that seem to go to the Scillies are quite respectful. You're not meant to have fires on the island, but people do, and they tidy up after them, and you're not meant to camp. But I've seen sea kayakers setting up and bivvying.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those.
Sally's smallest tent in the world would be below the radar, maybe. So maybe we'll go there by kayak shortly. And of course, I have to mention the Torpedo, the electric outboard. We've had one for 10 years, and we just can't understand why anybody still uses petrol outboards. In Canada, everybody was roaring around with their ribs, and we had a range of 6 miles with our rib with a Torpedo, and silent, charge it up at night when off the inverter, and why they're not more widely used, I have no idea.
You say charging off the inverter, we charge ours off 12 volts. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's
speed. It charges at 12 volts. You can charge it anything up to 50 volts directly, Tim, but the more volts you put into it, it's not not a straight line relationship, but you'll charge twice as quickly with 24 volts, and it tapers off over that. We charge off the inverter. But,
I mean, we've got our really trusty 2-stroke Yamaha 5 horsepower. We can both plane at 12 knots with that. But it came out once when we were anchored in St. Mary's, and someone had invited us to the pub on St. Martin's, and we popped that on and jetted across to St. Martin's. And that was the only time. We ended up at the end of the year, at the end of the summer, we ended up giving away all our fuel that we've been carrying. Because the Torpedo got used.
We left Scotland with it's actually a 9.8 Daihatsu 2-stroke on the back of the boat, and it's not moved since. It's not been off the back of the boat since we left Scotland in 2015. We've done everything with the Torpedo, and vastly prefer it. It's easier to manhandle, it's quiet, it's rechargeable, no petrol, no oil slicks, no 2-stroke pollution. So that's my bit of preaching.
I think David's just reminded me that there are campsites on every island except Tresco, and he's quite right, there is.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention was during your anchoring presentation, Bob very helpfully held up a book called Happy Hooking, which of course is by one of our Vice Commodores, Daria and Alex Blackwell, which is a great textbook on there it comes, a great textbook on anchoring. That's available as an ebook. Bob, there was a comment, somebody wanted to know if your book is available as an ebook, or are you all paper?
The short answer is not yet, but that is coming.
Great. A few more questions on the blog. Oh yeah, the campsite. Yeah, you read out that one. Fine. Lots of comments on campsites. Toste asks, are we in Canada? No, we're back in windy, wet Scotland just at the moment, I'm afraid.
What do you mean you're afraid?
We have 80 knot winds. 80
knot winds.
80 knot winds to be afraid of tomorrow, I think. So we've got both anchors out. Emmie, a favour from you, please. I'm not sure. She's not there at the moment, but can we?
Yeah, she sat next to me. She's just.
Can we use one of your photos as the header for the recording on the webinar? They are magnificent photos. It would look great on the OCC website. Would that be okay?
Photos of her artwork?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Would you? Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, we would love that.
That would be super. If you could email me one or something, that would be great.
Yeah, we've got. Well, she's done a few of a few sailing-y based ones from Norway, Canaries, and Cornwall and Isles of Scilly. So yeah, I'll have to send them across.
That would be great. There are more questions, Tim, but we've been going for ages, so it's probably time to wrap up. You've still got quite a few people online. Can't see how many. Yeah, you still got 100 odd people online, and you topped out at 200 actually today. So that's a good, a good audience. Didn't quite make the 1,000, unfortunately, but maybe next time. Maybe for the Jordan series drone, we'll get 1,000. Fantastic. Anybody else got any quick questions? I want to just thank David and Judith for dialing in this evening. You're welcome to join any of our talks to come. They're open to anybody. I don't think you're OCC members, but I'm sure we'll sort that out. But thank you very much for your contribution this evening, and thanks for joining us. Anything else you want to say, Tim?
No, just yeah, thanks. And we're out of the water now, so we're taking to a van for a year or so, and until we feel as though we're the little ones ready to go to sea. And I'm sure a few of you would probably say, actually, there's no age that you can go to sea. You can go immediately. I know Bob and David and would give testament to that. But we're land based for at least a year and a half, I think.
Right, well,
may I just say how much, Tim, I enjoyed your wonderful photography and video. It was very, very good indeed, and well worth watching. And can I say thank you to you, Simon, for inviting us to be here for a very interesting evening. Thank you very much.
A pleasure, David, and please join us again next Thursday and the Thursday after that. I think we've got a few more in this series. And I guess a plea to anybody else that's online at the moment. I think our last talk in this series is something like the 20th of December or 18th of December or something. But if anybody wants to do any talks in the new year, we'll break for Christmas, but just drop me a line and we'll get you on the OCC webinar show. So thank you very much. Thanks, Tim and Emmie. Great talk. I really enjoyed your drone photography. Somebody asked what drone you use. I think you've got a Mavic, haven't you? Is that right?
Spark.
Ah, okay.
We had a few. We're now on Spark number 3.
Yes. Well, if you will fly them above the fog, it's
It wasn't that did it.
I'm interested that your drone wouldn't take off because you were too close to the airport. Surely you were too close to the airport when you were on St. Martin's as well, weren't you? Because isn't it a 5-mile radius or something?
I don't know. It comes up with this little chart, and there's a red area, and next to Watermill Cove, and most of St. Mary's, it just won't let you. But everywhere else, I could.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
I think you do have to tick a box saying I accept responsibility
for bringing a helicopter.
but when you're on St. Mary, it doesn't matter what you do. You just can't take off. Just to let you.
We almost had a boat fire actually with one of the drones, but that's another story.
Oh, really? Lithium battery fire?
Well, it's the boat. Basically, the drone went in the drink at that very nice anchorage outside the River Yelm, and it was very clear. And I managed to hook it with a fishing line, and then I spent that whole evening rinsing it out and fixing it. And whilst I was sat there on the chart table fixing it, the battery exploded, caught fire.
Wow.
And yeah, filled the cabin with acrid smoke, which wasn't very nice. And so that was drone number 1 down. And then drone number 2 went down. Because of that incident, I changed my launching protocol to something more steady and stable and reliable. And that protocol didn't work so well. So I lost another one in the River Fowl.
Drone number 2 was only 2 weeks later.
Well, drone number 1 lasted 4 years. And drone number 2 lasted 4 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. And anyway, drone number 3 sorted. We're going for another 4 years.
That was lovely pictures above the clouds, that sunset or sunrise or whatever it was. It was really all very atmospheric. It was, Yeah, brave. Could you actually see it all the time, or were you just going on the what you're seeing through the phone?
Sorry, say again.
Did you actually lose eye contact with the drone when you went above the cloud?
No, Simon, that's illegal. You must always keep eye contact with your drone.
So you did. Okay, fair enough. Super. Well, thank you very much both, and great talk, great illustrations, great video, great drones, great adventure really, and well done for pulling it off during 2021, which wasn't the easiest of sailing seasons, but
It was not.
none of it looked terribly crowded. I always think of the the Scillies in midsummer as being everybody goes there, but it didn't look too bad at all, Tim.
Well, I think there's lots of anchorages you can go to that are out of the way. Sure, the Grimsby's and St Helens Pool were busy, and Porthcressa, but plenty of others to go at, and we used David's book to help us pick and choose those and try stuff that we hadn't tried, and we added a little bit to that as well, and there's definitely plenty to go at.
Also,
if you're willing to.
When there was settled weather, then lots of boats would sort of pile in, and then every 2 or 3 weeks there'd be a bit of a storm coming, and then it would sort of empty out again. So at which point, if you were happy to stay there, then it was quite quiet.
Yeah, I guess those UK storms are so well forecast now. You've got the time to get out the way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and that's what we did for the second one. We were kind of having to get back anyway. We'd like to have stayed a little bit longer, but it was blatantly coming. It was going to be a baddie, and we thought, I'll tell you what, we'll go to the Helford River, So we took that 2 days before it came, and fortunately we did, really, because it was a baddie, and there was some serious, I mean, the Senham lifeboat has to come out when, the Scillies have already got Isles of Scilly. I've already got 2 good lifeboats, and the helicopter. They had to winch somebody off from Porthcressa and on the other side. And as far as I understand it, I was told that some of the moorings in Hewtown actually moved.
Wow. Gosh.
Yeah, were actually dragged, which is amazing given that they're actually designed to be 2 or 3 up sometimes.
Yeah. Gosh. Great. Well, thanks very much both. For the remaining 70-odd people online, good evening. Thanks for joining us, and we'll tune in next week. More isles, the island of Tasmania. So Jeremy Firth, who is the very loyal editor of our OCC newsletter, also wrote the anchoring guide or cruising guide to Tasmania, which is a work of art. And he's going to give us a talk on the pros and cons or ins and outs of cruising Tasmania at the other end of the world. He'll be doing that he's getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to do that, which is a great sacrifice. So I hope to meet everybody there again next week. Thanks, Ted.
Thank you so much, Simon.
Thanks, Emmie. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
David and Judith.